Hello everyone and welcome to my Chocobo Mystery Dungeon Everybody review. Chocobo Mystery Dungeon Everybody is a remake of Final Fantasy Fable's Chocobo Dungeon released on the Wii. The new version, released on the Switch and PS4, features updated dialogue and voice acting, but the biggest change is the buddy system. This allows you to bring a friend to help you traverse the dungeons. Your buddy can be controlled by the AI or a second player. We'll talk more about the multiplayer experience a bit later. The game starts out with a treasure hunter, of course named Sid, and our Chocobo protagonist, aptly named Chocobo. They're headed for the Tower in the Sands in search of some sort of treasure. Inside the tower is where the game teaches you the basics like equipping items, using skills, and how to avoid traps. This is also where we're treated to one of my favorite aspects of this game, the music. Remix versions of classic Final Fantasy music can be a risk, but for the most part I think they nailed it. The very first dungeon starts us off right with a great rendition of the Chaos Temple theme from Final Fantasy I. It managed to hit all the right nostalgia points while adding its own unique touches. After the tutorial dungeon, Sid and Chocobo find themselves teleported to the town of Lost Time. And yes, that is the name. In this town, people have their memories taken by the Bell of Oblivion, situated in the middle of town. No one seems too bothered by this, despite forgetting their own occupations and personal relationships. Seriously, how is anyone supposed to get anything done when they can't remember what their job is? The bell causes Sid to lose his memories, but thankfully Chocobo seems to be unaffected. After meeting a few more of the townspeople, an egg falls from the sky. It hatches to reveal a baby inside, which contradicts everything I learned in health class. The baby, whose name turns out to be Raffaello, has the power to help people remember things. This is where you're introduced to the core gameplay loop. Enter dungeons, clear out the boss, and help the townspeople regain their memories. The story is a bit bare bones, but serves its purpose of getting you from dungeon to dungeon well enough. The dungeons are randomly generated, so with few exceptions, the dungeons will be different every time. As you move about, you'll have to avoid traps, defeat monsters, and try to find your way down to the next floor. Combat is essentially turn-based. Every time Chocobo moves or takes an action, it's considered a turn. After you take your turn, all the monsters on the current floor take their turn. In combat, Chocobo can attack with talons, use skills or items, or move one space in the dungeon. Skills use SP, which regenerates a little bit each turn. The skills available to you are determined by your current job. There are 14 jobs available to you. You'll be able to switch between jobs at the start of each dungeon and at certain checkpoints within some of the dungeons. As you defeat monsters, you'll earn job points to help level up your current job and unlock new skills. The White Mage learns spells like Cure and Protect, while the Thief gets the ability to steal items or move around without waking up sleeping enemies. While not every job is ideal for every situation, and some jobs do seem to be more useful than others, I've yet to find a job that didn't feel viable. This is in part thanks to the buddy system. The buddy system allows you to bring a companion into the dungeon with you. As I mentioned earlier, this companion can either be controlled by the AI or a second player. You'll have a wide variety of buddies to pick from, each with a special ability to help you out. Having these options allows you to balance out the shortcomings of your current job. Have a black mage that can dish out damage but has trouble staying alive? Bring a healing buddy along to keep you going. Now's probably a good time to take a look at the multiplayer aspect. The game allows a second player to control the buddy you bring with you into certain dungeons. And that's my first issue with the multiplayer. For a game called Everybody, there are too many dungeons where you're unable to bring a buddy. To be fair, most of these dungeons are considered challenge dungeons, but quite a few of them either unlock new jobs or are required for the story. Sometimes both. Worst of all, there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason as to which dungeons allow buddies and which don't. For example, one of the early dungeons gives you the blindness status effect through the whole dungeon, meaning your accuracy with physical attacks is greatly reduced. Despite being required in order to remove cursed items and unlocking a new job, you cannot bring a buddy with you. It's hard to see how having a buddy with the same status effect would break the dungeon's gimmick. Now compare that to a dungeon later in the game where the challenge is that your hunger meter is always at 0. When your hunger drops to 0, you take damage every turn. This is a dungeon where I could at least understand the argument that having a buddy would be overpowered, as a healing buddy would completely undermine the challenge of the dungeon. Surprisingly, this dungeon does allow you to bring a buddy. It's this kind of inconsistency that's frustrating. It's not as bad when you're playing alone, but when you have a friend there with you on the couch who's constantly having to sit out for seemingly arbitrary reasons, it can get a bit annoying. Speaking of annoying, there's one other really obnoxious thing about the multiplayer. Remember earlier when I talked about how much I enjoyed the remixed music? Well, there's a special remix of the Chocobo theme that plays in every dungeon whenever you have a second player control your buddy. It overrides whatever song would normally play in that dungeon, so you end up hearing the same track 90% of the time. And it's bad. Just listen to this. This is what plays in every dungeon at almost all times whenever you play with another person. And look, I'm not saying you can't make interesting music with unconventional instruments. I'm just saying when you feature a slide whistle, cuckoo clock, and a bike horn, you've got something of an uphill battle. That's not to say everything about the multiplayer is bad. In fact, despite those two flaws, I greatly enjoyed playing co-op. It opens up a lot of new strategies and tactics to try out. The second player is able to move around freely without the monsters taking actions. Once they attack though, they can't act again until the first player moves or takes an action. The second player can still move around after attacking though. This means if you play it right, the second player can run in, attack a monster, and run away without the monster getting to act. It does require a fair amount of coordination. If both players try to run around doing their own thing, you're likely not going to go very far, but if you work together, it can provide a very rewarding experience. The main story of the game took around 30 to 35 hours to complete, doing as much of the side content as I could. There's still more to do once you finish the game. Completing the main story unlocks a few new dungeons, including one that's 99 floors. There is also an endless dungeon with monsters that get more difficult the further you go. The game even keeps track of the highest floor you've achieved like a high score, encouraging you to come back and try to push your limits. I love this approach, and it kept me playing for dozens of hours after finishing the main story. My final rating for this game is an 8 out of 10. The multiplayer really needed a little more polish. Replacing all of the great Final Fantasy tracks with one that is so repetitive and frankly obnoxious is really hard to overlook. Forcing the second player to the sideline occasionally for long stretches of time for seemingly no reason can take a lot of the excitement out of the multiplayer experience. The game also has a tendency to jump back and forth between being a roguelite and a roguelike. Sometimes this works with the optional dungeons, but doing this with story-based dungeons creates an inconsistent experience. But at the end of the day, these are minor annoyances compared to the hours of enjoyable dungeon crawling I got out of the game. The job system is well implemented, and the game does a good job of giving you an incentive to keep playing even after you finish the main story. If you're a fan of dungeon crawlers or Final Fantasy, I definitely recommend checking this out. That's gonna do it for me. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you've already played this, or if you're planning on playing it, let me know what you think of the game in the comments. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.